Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. After a week-long hiatus to recharge and regroup, I'm back with another video covering some weapon builds for mid-game players, focusing on setups you can build after you get through the level 1 to 15 grind and have some level 2 to 3 traders unlocked. These builds are budget focused, but they're not pure budget builds. With some smart choices of cost-effective attachments, you can set up builds with a lot of versatility and manageable recoil for a pretty decent price. I aimed for under 100,000 rubles total on each of these builds, while still getting an optic and upgraded parts like handguards and compensators. I'll also quickly go over the ammo choices that I've been running with these builds after I go over all the parts you'll need for each one, so you'll have a pretty good idea of what ammo that you can pair with each setup. But with that intro out of the way, let's get into the builds, starting with a level 15 SKS setup that I've been using pretty heavily this wipe. The SKS is a very straightforward weapon, and it's one of the staples of the early game since it's cheap and can actually be purchased at level 1 and it shoots a good round. I've been mainlining a very simple SKS build this wipe in a lot of my budget runs for questing, because you can set one up with a decent sight, compensator, and extended 20 round mag for pretty cheap, and you can even suppress it for under 100k if you want to go quiet. This isn't a low recoil meta build by any means, and it still requires a patient trigger finger and good aim to make it work at max effectiveness. However, because the SKS is not a high value weapon, a lot of players will just leave it on your body, and this build is an insurance fraud specialist, coming back pretty much every time that you die with it. To start off, I just use the plain wooden SKS from PRAPOR level 1, which you can get for about 23,000 rubles or around 15,000 on the flea market. The most important addition to this setup is the SKS SOCOM mount, sold by JAEGER level 2 for about 12,000 rubles. This basically gives your SKS a railed handguard that can mount a red dot sight and tactical devices like lasers or flashlights. For the optic, it's largely up to your personal preference since almost all red dot sights work on this handguard. Most of them cost about 20k now, and I really like the P1X42 on the SKS, but for a cheap option, you can just use the Cobra reflex sight from PRAPOR level 2, which also gets you 1% extra recoil control. Next, I get the weapon tuning SKS thread adapter from JAEGER level 2 as well, which lets you add a muzzle device to the SKS. For a budget option, you can just get the DTK-I compensator from Skier level 2 for about 4,600 rubles, which is a very cheap piece for recoil reduction. The other muzzle device that I've been using a lot with this setup is the DTK-4M suppressor, which has an average flea market cost of around 30,000 rubles and is generally less expensive than the Hexagon SKS suppressor. Finally, for a finishing touch on this build, or any of the builds in this video, you can add the ULTRAFIRE flashlight from Skier level 1 for pretty cheap. You need the 25mm mount ring to add this, but the light itself is only about 35 euros from Skier level 1, and it's a pretty good way to use some of the euros that you've stocked up during raids. You also want to pick up the 20 round SKS mags from PEACEKEEPER level 2 for about $50 each. For your ammo choices, you can either craft 7.62 BP rounds in the hideout using 1 green gunpowder, or you can just use 7.62 PS rounds from PRAPOR level 1 and be sure to aim for the head to avoid getting stopped by armor. The overall stats on this thing aren't super great, with only around 40 ergonomics and 130 to 140 recoil, but I've had some awesome raids with this setup, and if you don't spam it and pace your shots well, it will definitely get the job done. The total cost on this build is quite affordable though, at around 60,000 rubles total, or about 90,000 rubles if you add the suppressor. That's using trader prices as well, so it's even cheaper if you get good deals on the flea market. With good aim and smart plays, this SKS setup is a great choice for mid-range maps and budget looting or quest runs. Next up, I'll go over a budget-focused recoil build for AK rifles. This one is based on the AK-74M, but you can transfer it to basically any AK rifle without much trouble. The reason I base it on the AK-74M is because that rifle has the lowest base recoil of the AK rifles, which means it gets better overall stats when you set it up as a budget build. This, combined with its low price of around 20 to 25,000 rubles on the flea market, since it can drop from basically any scab and weapon crates, makes it my preferred choice for setting up cheap AK builds. Some parts of this build require level 18 to 20 and PEACEKEEPER level 3, but you can make a slightly modified version of it starting at level 15 with just PRAPOR and Skier level 2. After grabbing an AK-74M from the flea market, the first addition I make is the DTK-I compensator from Skier level 2, which is pretty much the best budget compensator for the AK. If you want to add this to a 7.62 AK rifle, all you need is the TT-AKM adapter from Skier level 2. Next, I swapped the handguard for the CAA RS-47 handguard from Peacekeeper level 2, which in my opinion is the best budget handguard for the AK with mid-range recoil reduction and 4 rails for only $100. The foregrip on this build has a few different options. If you have Peacekeeper level 3, I like the MAGPUL RVG grip. This thing has amazing stats for the price, and I use it on probably 75% of my builds. If you have Skier level 3, you can swap this for the RK0 grip and save about 3,000 rubles for the same recoil stats. If you only have level 2 traders, you're pretty much stuck with the Tango Down stubby grip or the expensive but more effective RK1 grip at Skier level 2. Whatever you choose, it easily fits onto the handguard without needing any additional rails or modding. To get an optic onto this build, you can either use one of the dovetail reflex sights like the Cobra, or you can buy the TTOI rear sight adapter at PRAPOR level 2, which is a very cheap mount for red dot sights on any AK. As I mentioned earlier, most red dots have an average price of around 20,000 rubles right now, so pick your favorite. I've set the Trigicon SRS sight on this build since I find it usually has a slightly lower average price on the flea market. The final important piece of this build is the GP25 recoil pad, sold by PRAPOR level 2. This fits onto standard AK stocks and actually brings the recoil stats on par with some of the best stocks in the game. It's a very underrated attachment, and it should be added to all of your AK builds once you get PRAPOR level 2. Finally, the last piece that I added is the PP19 pistol grip at PRAPOR level 2, which gives you extra ergonomics for only 900 rubles, which is well worth the price. For ammo in this build, I've been farming reserve for the 120 count boxes of BT ammo, which are very plentiful. In one raid, you can sometimes get 480 or more rounds, which should fuel at least a few runs with this build. The overall stats on this setup when used on an AK-74M is around 60 ergonomics and 67 recoil. Those are fairly balanced stats, especially considering the low overall investment in budget parts. For the total cost on this setup, it comes out to around 89,000 rubles if everything is purchased at trader prices. You can bring this number down by getting the rifle on the market or just looting one during a raid. For the last build in this video, I want to go over my favorite budget SA58 setup. It's got kind of a high level requirement since the most important part is locked behind level 30, but the price is low and it's an amazingly effective weapon in the right hands. I use this build a ton during the late game quest grind from level 30 to 40, and like the M1A, which I've talked about a lot on this channel, it brings a crazy amount of stopping power to any fight, even with cheap ammo and cheap attachments. The SA58 has very high recoil, but if you treat it like a DMR in ranged fights and only use full auto when you're in hipfire distance, this rifle is a PvP powerhouse, and among my absolute favorite weapons in Tarkov. First up, you want to grab an SA58 off the flea market and not from the traders. The price is only about 50,000 rubles on average because player scabs spawn with it, so the market is usually flooded with them. I leave the basic Austrian muzzle brake on the SA58 because it actually has higher stats than most of the other 7.62 compensators that aren't endgame attachments. The most important part for this build is the universal M-LOK handguard, sold by mechanic level 3 for about 6,000 rubles. This handguard takes M-LOK rails to add accessories, but importantly for this build, it allows you to mount a small red dot sight on the handguard itself. This is actually one of the only ways to add a sight to the SA58 until you reach level 4 traders and can buy the Extreme Duty Dust Cover or CASV handguard. This handguard used to be flooded on the market, but due to the new found in raid mechanics, you basically have to wait until level 30 to get this from mechanic level 3 unless you want to get ripped off on the market. For the optic, I personally like the Delta Point reflex sight the most when it's mounted up on the handguard like this, and you'll also need the mount for this sight, both sold by Peacekeeper level 2 for about $200 total. Next up, my foregrip choice on this build is the Zenit RK0 at Skier level 3, which is basically a budget version of the RVG grip, which is also a great choice. You can swap this for the RK1 for extra recoil control, but that's going to add 10k to the total cost as well. Finally, there's 2 finishing touches for this build that are kind of optional, but in my opinion are well worth the price. You can leave the stock and pistol grip untouched if you just want to save money, but there's some cheap upgrades available. First, you can get the SAW style SA58 grip for only 3,000 rubles at mechanic level 2, adding some extra ergonomics to the build. Next, you can search the flea market for the SA58 BRS stock, which is usually only about 9 to 10,000 rubles on the market. This stock has the same recoil stats as the default one, but significantly higher ergonomics, which is a pretty good addition to the build. For the ammo on this one, the choice is very easy. Just buy M80 rounds from Peacekeeper level 2 and fall in love with the absolute best budget armor piercing bullet in all of Tarkov. For the overall stats on this build, you're looking at 133 recoil and between 38 to 50 ergonomics, depending on if you swap the stock and pistol grip. The total cost on this setup only comes out to around 86,000 rubles, or about 96,000 if you add the upgraded stock and pistol grip. Well, that about covers it for these 3 builds. I hope you found the video useful, and if you take these out into a raid, hopefully they work well for you and you get some big wins. I really love creating builds like this, and I have a bunch more kicking around my preset list that I'll likely be covering in future videos during this patch. With the new flea market changes, knowing how to make effective builds from the traders is super important, and I really hope this gives you some ideas for your own setups. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch, and if you want to check out the stream, I've got a link to that in the description, along with links to my Twitter, Discord, and Patreon for anyone looking to stay up to date on my content or support the channel. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City. Come on!